Once upon a quiet spring evening in 1919, when the world was still healing from the echoes of war, a small German town called Weimar held a secret. The air there was ready for a new beginning. The streets were calm, touched by the soft blue of twilight, and the windows of the old buildings glimmered like sleepy eyes preparing for night. In one of those buildings, a tall, thoughtful architect named Walter Gropius sat at his desk. Papers were scattered around him like tiny white birds, each carrying a fragment of a dream. Gropius had spent many nights thinking, imagining, sketching, and imagining again. He wanted to build something that didn't yet exist in the world. Not a house, not a monument, but a place where imagination could be trained like a gentle muscle. He dreamed of a school where art and craft would no longer be separate worlds. A painter should understand the weight of wood, a carpenter should feel the rhythm of color, a sculptor should listen to the heartbeat of metal. Gropius believed that when all these arts met, they would create something new, something honest, something beautiful. As the evening darkened, he wrote the words that would become a promise. Let us create a new guild of craftsmen, free of the divisions that separate us. The moment he finished the sentence, the candle beside him flickered, as if the flame itself nodded in approval. And so, in that room filled with quiet warmth and fragile hope, the Bauhaus was born, not with noise or celebration, but with a whisper, a thought, a glow. Like a lantern gently lit in the middle of a sleepy town. The next morning broke softly, with thin golden light spilling over Weimar. Word of the new school spread slowly at first, like a breeze crossing fields. People were curious. Some were excited. Others were confused. But everyone, in some quiet corner of their heart, sensed that something unusual was beginning. For the Bauhaus was not just a building. It was not just a school. It was a seed of light, planted carefully in a world that had forgotten how to dream. And although no one knew it yet, that seed would grow, stretching its branches across continents and decades, shaping the way humans would build, draw, live, and imagine. But for now, in this first chapter, in this tender beginning, it was simply a quiet lantern glowing in Weimar, waiting for the footsteps of the first students, the first colors, the first sparks of a revolution gently wrapped in the softness of night. Morning settled gently over Weimar like a pale golden blanket, and the newly born Bauhaus breathed its first real breath. The building itself seemed to wake slowly, its windows catching the early light as if blinking into consciousness. Somewhere in its long corridors, dust floated lazily in the sunbeams, drifting like tiny spirits preparing the place for what was to come. And what was to come were the dreamers. They arrived one by one, then in pairs, then in small clusters that grew with each passing day. The roads leading to the school filled with footsteps, light, heavy, hesitant, excited, each belonging to someone who carried a world inside them. There was Elise, a shy young painter whose pockets were stained with color because she could never resist touching wet paint. She walked with quiet determination, clutching a small notebook filled with sketches of skies and rooftops. She hoped the Bauhaus would teach her how to turn her drawings into something bigger, something that could breathe. There was Matthias, who had grown up in his father's carpentry workshop. His hands were rough, but his imagination was soft and enormous. He dreamed of shaping wood into objects that felt like poetry. When he heard Gropius speak about uniting art and craft, he felt something awaken inside him, something that had slept for too long. There was Hannah, a weaver from a small village, who carried rolls of fabric wrapped in brown paper. She listened to the rhythm of threads the way musicians listen to notes, and she believed that every pattern hid a secret story. The idea of mixing her craft with painting, metal, and architecture made her heart flutter like a loose ribbon in the wind. And there were dozens more. Sculptors with dust still clinging to their boots. Potters smelling faintly of clay. Metalworkers with sparks in their eyes. Young architects with rolled drawings under their arms. Thinkers, wanderers, idealists. All drawn by the same invisible pull. It was as though the Bauhaus were a lighthouse, calling ships from every shore toward a harbor of possibility. Inside the school, the halls echoed with new voices, soft introductions, nervous laughter, the clatter of tools being unpacked. The classrooms, still bare and plain, were suddenly alive with color as students spread out their brushes, their fabrics, their blueprints. Walter Gropius walked among them with a calm smile, watching this strange, beautiful mixture of talents settling into place. He didn't see just a group of students, he saw the future, shimmering faintly like heat above a distant road. He knew the journey would not be easy. He knew traditions would resist. He knew change was a storm that frightened many. But as he looked at these young dreamers filling the rooms of the Bauhaus, he felt something steady inside him, like the earth beneath a new foundation. These students were not here to follow the old ways. They were here to shape new ones, with their hands, their minds, their courage. And so, chapter by chapter, day by day, the Bauhaus began to hum softly, like a machine built from hope and curiosity. In this gathering of painters and potters, weavers and woodworkers, a new world was quietly preparing to unfold. A world where imagination would not just be admired, but built, brick by brick, line by line, thread by thread. As the days passed, the Bauhaus breathed deeper, filling its long corridors with the warm hum of creativity. But the school was not only shaped by its students. It was guided, gently, boldly, magically, by its masters, the teachers who carried entire worlds inside their minds. They did not look like ordinary teachers. They looked like travelers from distant artistic planets. The first to arrive each morning was Paul Klee. He walked softly, almost floating, as though his feet barely touched the ground. His eyes always seemed to be following an invisible line in the air, a line only he could see. When he spoke to the students, his voice was calm, delicate, mysterious. Color, he would say, is a place in itself. A land you can walk through. A room you can enter. Let it take you somewhere. The students listened with wide eyes. Some felt as though Klee had opened a window in their minds that they had not known was there. Then there was Vasily Kandinsky, who arrived like a gust of wind that had learned how to speak. He believed colors had souls and shapes had tempers. Red, he said, was restless. Blue could be infinite. A circle might whisper, a triangle might shout. When he lectured, it felt like music. Some students swore they actually heard colors when he drew on the blackboard. Together, Klee and Kandinsky were like two constellations guiding young artists through new skies. But they were not alone. There was Johannes Itten, who wore long robes and taught breathing exercises before lessons. He believed that to create, one must first feel the world vibrating inside. He introduced the famous preliminary course, where students learned the hidden nature of form, contrast, and texture. He had them crush charcoal, tear paper, stretch fabric, press metal. Not to make something beautiful, but to understand the soul of materials. Some mornings, the rooms looked like gentle storms had passed through them. But in the chaos, something new was forming: intuition, awareness, confidence. In another workshop, Lionel Feininger taught the students how to build dreams with lines. His architectural forms looked like cathedrals floating in mist. Under his guidance, students learned that a drawing could be a skeleton. And also a song. All these masters were different. But they shared one simple belief. Art should not sit on a pedestal. Art should live. Art should work. Art should breathe with the people. The students felt this truth spreading through the school like warm light. They began to see the world differently. A window was no longer just a window, it was a frame for light. A chair was not just a chair, it was a sculpture with a purpose. A cup could be a lesson in curves, balance, and touch. Every day, the Bauhaus felt more alive, as if the building itself listened, learned, and dreamed along with the people inside it. And as the sun set over Weimar, the windows of the school glowed with yellow and orange light. Anyone walking by at night would hear the tapping of tools, the soft murmur of voices, the laughter of students discovering something new about themselves. Inside those walls, under the guidance of these extraordinary masters, a revolution was quietly waking up. Soon the Bauhaus was no longer just a place to think, it became a place to do. The heart of the school beat inside its workshops, each one alive with sound, color, movement, and the warm chaos of creation. The wood workshop smelled of fresh shavings, as sweet as warm bread. Matthias, the young carpenter, spent hours there shaping planks into curves and angles that felt almost like music in his hands. The masters taught him not to force the wood, but to listen to it. Every material, they said, has a will. Respect it, and it will guide you. Next door, the metal workshop sparkled with silver light. Students hammered glowing pieces of steel, their tools ringing like tiny bells. Sparks rose and fell like fireflies. Under the guidance of sculptors and craftsmen, they learned how cold metal could be bent into forms that felt warm and alive, lamps that glowed like moons, teapots shaped like gentle geometry. The weaving workshop was a world of color and motion. Threads stretched from wall to wall like dancing rainbows, and Hannah, the weaver, moved through them with quiet grace. Each loom whispered a soft rhythm, tap, pull, slide, like a lullaby made of fiber. Here, patterns weren't decorations. They were stories, memories, and tiny pieces of architecture woven into cloth. In the pottery studio, clay turned slowly on spinning wheels, rising and falling beneath patient hands. Students shaped bowls with soft edges, cups with shy curves, vases with bold, rising lines. The air was cool and earthy, and when the kiln doors opened, a warm orange glow washed over the room like sunrise. And then, of course, there was the glass workshop. Pieces of colored glass caught the sunlight and scattered it across the walls, turning the workshop into a room full of quiet rainbows. Students cut and assembled glowing fragments, creating windows that looked like frozen music. Every workshop had its own smells, sounds, secrets. But all of them shared one truth. Art was not something distant or sacred. Art was something you touched with your hands. Students moved from workshop to workshop, learning not just one craft, but many. They discovered how wood and metal spoke differently, how clay resisted at first but softened with time, how fabric could hold color the way lungs hold breath. And slowly, something magical happened. Painters began to think like carpenters. Carpenters began to think like designers. Weavers saw architecture in their patterns. Potters saw geometry in their bowls. Metalworkers found poetry in steel. The boundaries between the arts dissolved like mist, until only curiosity remained. At night, when the lamp stayed on long after sunset, the Bauhaus glowed like a workshop of stars. Students worked quietly, shadows moving against the warm windows, each one building a future they could not yet imagine, but could already feel forming beneath their fingertips. And those workshops filled with wonder. The Bauhaus started to become what the world would one day remember. A place where hands, heart, and mind moved together. As one. As weeks turned into months, the days at the Bauhaus grew brighter, louder, fuller, but the nights were something different. The nights were when the magic settled. When the workshops finally grew quiet and the tools rested, the students gathered in the courtyard, the canteen, the staircases, anywhere the moonlight decided to fall. They sat with cups of warm tea, scraps of fabric still clinging to their sleeves, pencil marks on their hands, clay dry on their fingertips. And they talked. Not small talk. Not chatter. But the kind of conversations that stretched gently into the early hours of morning. Conversations about color. Can blue feel heavy? Conversations about form. What shape is happiness? Conversations about life. Can a building teach people how to live kinder lives? These were the nights when the Bauhaus felt less like a school and more like a small universe, folding in on itself and expanding again with each idea. Elise the painter loved these nights the most. She often sat on the edge of a long wooden bench, sketchbook open on her lap, listening to others speak. The glow from the lamps cast soft gold on her pages, and as people shared their thoughts, her pencil moved, recording shapes of ideas, not things. Matthias, the carpenter, sometimes brought small blocks of wood, carving slowly while listening. Shavings gathered at his feet like curled feathers. He carved not furniture, but dreams, little abstract forms he couldn't yet name. And Hannah, the weaver, spread small samples of fabric across the table like fallen leaves. Each pattern reflected something someone had said hours before, a rhythm, a contrast, a thought turned into threads. The masters joined them too. Clee would wander in quietly, leaning against the wall, smiling at the students' wild theories. "Good," he would say softly. "Stretch your thinking until it nearly breaks. That's where new worlds begin." Kandinsky, on the other hand, spoke passionately, waving his hands like a conductor. "Do not fear the unknown. It is the birthplace of creation." Even Gropius, with his calm, steady presence, sometimes sat with them, listening more than he spoke. He watched his dream take shape, not through blueprints, but through the minds of the students glowing with possibility. Some nights ended with singing. Some with sketches spread across the courtyard stones. Some with laughter echoing down the hallways like the school itself were smiling. And on the rarest nights, when the moon was high and the air carried a quiet stillness, it felt as though the world outside the Bauhaus simply faded. As if the school floated alone in a gentle sea of darkness, lit from within by ideas whispering and weaving themselves into the future. These nights were soft revolutions. They did not shake the earth. They did not make headlines. But in the quiet glow of shared imagination, something profound was happening. The students were beginning to understand that creating was not just an act of making. It was a way of seeing, of thinking, of being. A way that could shape their lives. And perhaps, one day, shape the world itself. The Bauhaus had already become a place where reality stretched, twisted, and opened itself to possibility. But no one expected a vampire. It happened on a night when fog wrapped tightly around Weimar, muffling sounds and softening edges. The students were gathered in the courtyard, drinking tea and talking about the balance between form and function, when a sudden chill swept through the air, the kind that doesn't belong to weather, but to presence. A tall figure stepped out of the mist. He wore a long black coat that brushed the ground, and his skin was pale like paper left too long in moonlight. His eyes gleamed, not red, not hostile, but curious, as if searching for something he had lost centuries ago. Elise, brave in her own quiet way, whispered, "Do vampires attend design schools?" The figure bowed slightly. "My name," he said in a voice smooth as polished stone, "is Lucian Noct. I have wandered across continents, through castles and cities, but I sensed something unusual here, a light that does not fear the dark." Matthias tightened his grip on a piece of wood, just in case. Hannah hid behind a roll of fabric, not entirely afraid, mostly fascinated. Walter Gropius stepped forward with calm politeness, as if greeting a visiting professor rather than a creature of legend. "What brings you to the Bauhaus?" he asked. Lucian's eyes glimmered. "I have lived in eras where beauty was ornament, where buildings were prisons of stone, where objects served only those in power. But tonight, I felt something shift, a pulse of pure creation. I came to see what it was." The students exchanged glances. Only at the Bauhaus could a vampire arrive and ask sincere questions about design philosophy. Lucian walked slowly through the courtyard, his gaze lingering on sketches, wooden forms, woven patterns. His footsteps made no sound, and though he moved through the lamplight, he cast no shadow. "How strange," he murmured, touching a metal lamp with delicate fingers, "to see humans striving not for luxury, but for clarity. Not for excess, but essence." Kandinsky appeared behind him like a lightning bolt wrapped in velvet. "And you," he said boldly, "what do you create, creature of the night?" Lucian smiled, revealing just the faintest hint of fangs. "I create nothing," he said softly. "That is my curse. I have witnessed centuries of art, but I cannot shape. I can only watch." The courtyard fell silent. Then Paul Klee stepped forward, eyes bright with mischief and tenderness. "Then perhaps," Klee said, "you are exactly where you need to be. The Bauhaus is for those who wish to learn to see." Lucian blinked, and for a moment, the immortal looked almost human. He wandered the workshops through the night. He admired the geometry of chairs, the purity of glass, the sincerity of handmade objects. He listened to debates about form and function, equality and design, the unity of art and craft. And slowly, impossibly, something in him began to shift. For the first time in hundreds of years, he felt inspired. "You humans," he said finally, standing before the students gathered like lanterns around him, "are reshaping the world. Not with superstition or grandeur, but with purpose. With intention. With truth." He bowed deeply. "This school is more powerful than any castle I have ever lived in. It does not trap life, it frees it." As dawn approached, he stepped back into the fading mist. "If you will allow," Lucian said, "I shall return. Not as a creature of legend, but as a student." And the fog swallowed him up, leaving behind only the faint scent of old books and moonlight. The students stared at one another. Kandinsky finally broke the silence with a grin. "Well," he said, "every great movement deserves one immortal admirer." And so the Bauhaus continued, now with the rumor, the myth, the possibility that somewhere in the fog, an ancient vampire walked the earth inspired. Not by blood, but by design. Lucian Noct returned the very next night, slipping into the Bauhaus courtyard as silently as a shadow remembering it once belonged to a body. He moved with the calm certainty of a centuries-old creature, yet something in him felt new. A spark. A restlessness that wasn't hunger, but curiosity. The students had been waiting for him, some nervously, others excitedly, all aware that the Bauhaus had now crossed the line between reality and dream. But strangely, the school did not resist this surreal visitor. It welcomed him, as it welcomed all things strange and full of potential. Gropius greeted Lucian with a nod. "Tonight," he said, "you learn the first principle of the Bauhaus: light is not a luxury. It is a teacher." Lucian blinked, puzzled. Light was his oldest enemy, yet here it was, being offered like a gift. Clee stepped into the workshop, his eyes glowing with gentle mischief. "Come, Lucian. You do not need to stand in the light, only to understand it." The room was dim, lit only by a few small lamps. Clee placed one on a table, then set a sphere beside it. The sphere cast a soft, blurred shadow. "You see," Clee whispered, "a form is defined not by its edges, but by the dance between light and darkness. Without shadow, nothing has depth." Lucian stared, mesmerized. "No shadow," he murmured, "is exactly my curse." Clee shook his head. "Or your freedom. You, more than anyone, live between light and void. You are made of contrast. You are the lesson." The students gathered around, listening as if they were witnessing the rewriting of natural law. Clee handed Lucian a charcoal stick. "Draw the lamp," he said. Lucian hesitated. His hand trembled. He had watched centuries of human art, but never created even a single line. For someone who had lived so long, the blank paper felt strangely terrifying. But he lowered the charcoal. He began with a simple curve, hesitant, fragile. Then another. And as he drew, the room grew silent. The lines were unsure but honest, trembling but true. When he finished, the students leaned in. The drawing was imperfect, yet something pulsed inside it. A rawness, a sincerity no one expected from an immortal. Kandinsky stepped forward, eyes wide. "You draw," he said, "like someone who has seen the world from the outside for too long. There is melancholy, and longing, and clarity. This is not technique, this is vision." Lucian stared at the paper, astonished. "I did not think I could create anything at all." "That," Gropius said softly, "is why you must stay. The Bauhaus is not for those who know. It is for those who are willing to begin." The vampire lowered his head, not in fear, but in gratitude. Then something surreal happened. As he stood beneath the soft workshop lamp, for the first time in centuries, a faint shadow appeared at his feet. Small, incomplete, flickering like a shy thought. The students gasped. Lucian looked down, speechless. Clee smiled. "When you create," he whispered, "you anchor yourself to the world. Even the unnatural becomes real when it chooses to shape something." The shadow trembled, but it did not disappear. Lucian looked around the workshop, at the students, the masters, the tools, the glowing lamps. For the first time in his eternal existence, he felt human enough to belong. And so, in the quiet hours before dawn, a vampire learned the first Bauhaus lesson. Innovation is not the absence of darkness, but the ability to give darkness a form. Lucian Noct, once a wandering creature of moonlit ruins, now walked the halls of the Bauhaus with a strange new purpose. The students had grown used to him, the pale figure who appeared at dusk, drifting between workshops, absorbing every lesson with centuries of patience and a child's sense of wonder. But it was in the architecture studio that his world changed again. One evening, Gropius invited him into a room filled with blueprints pinned to tall boards. Lines crossed and intersected like constellations drawn by human hands. "Tonight," Gropius said, "you learn what we build when we build." Lucian tilted his head. "I have lived in castles," he murmured. "Stone walls, iron gates, towers meant to keep the world out." Gropius smiled. "And that is exactly why you are here. The Bauhaus does not build fortresses. We build possibilities." He gestured to the drafts. "These are not simply houses or schools or factories. They are ideas made habitable. The Bauhaus believes that architecture should serve life, not imprison it." Lucian's eyes softened. He knew too well the weight of being trapped in legend, and darkness, and immortality. As the students gathered around tables, Gropius set out the challenge. "Tonight, we designed something impossible. A space that could exist only in a world where shadows have meaning." Lucian froze. His faint new shadow, fragile but present, trembled on the floor. He stepped forward. "May I try?" The room fell silent. Students exchanged glances, a vampire designing architecture. But Gropius nodded without hesitation. Lucian took a pencil. His hand was steady now, the tremor from his first drawing replaced with a quiet confidence. He began to draw. Long corridors shaped like flowing rivers. High windows that sliced moonlight into geometric fragments. Rooms arranged in spirals, as if time itself lived inside them. Staircases that widened and narrowed like breaths. An atrium where darkness pooled not as fear, but as softness. The students leaned in, astonished. This was not human architecture. This was architecture of eternity. Kandinsky appeared behind him, almost whispering. "Your lines, they move like something ancient struggling to be new." Lucian stepped back. The drawing felt alive, vibrating gently, like a creature waking up. Gropius studied it for a long moment. "This," he said finally, "is not a building to live in. It is a building to live through." He tapped the page. "You understand something most humans forget. Shadows are not the opposite of light. They are the shape of light's journey." Lucian's dim shadow flickered again, and grew slightly stronger. The students erupted in excitement. "We must build a model of it. It looks like a dream carved into space. It feels like music trapped in a house." And so they worked through the night, cutting cardboard, bending wires, shaping tiny beams. Lucian watched with awe as his vision took physical form for the first time in his long existence. When the model stood completed on the table, everyone fell silent. It was unmistakably Bauhaus, clean lines, honest materials, pure intention. But also unmistakably Lucian, surreal, twilight-like, gently impossible. Elise whispered, "It looks like a home for shadows that never learn to be afraid." Lucian felt something shift inside him. Not hunger, not darkness, but belonging. Gropius placed a hand on his shoulder. "The Bauhaus," he said, "was always meant to break the boundaries between art and life. But you, Lucian, you remind us that innovation also breaks the boundaries between the real and the unreal." And for the first time since he became immortal, Lucian smiled. A small, careful smile. Full of dawn. Winter approached Weimar quietly, as if walking on soft feet. Frost touched the windows of the Bauhaus workshops, turning them into delicate white drawings, nature's own experiments in design. But inside, the school burned brighter than ever. Ideas were spreading like sparks in dry grass. And somewhere in the blur of things impossible he had accepted, Lucian Noct, the vampire who once feared even his own shadow, had become a part of the school's rhythm. He studied, he designed, he questioned, and he dreamed. But the night that truly changed everything began with a strange vibration under the students' feet. It was subtle at first, like the deep hum of a cello string. Then stronger. Then unmistakable. The entire Bauhaus building trembled. Elise looked up from her painting. "Is that an earthquake?" Matthias put down a chisel. "No, this feels different. Like it's coming from inside the building." Lucian stepped into the corridor. His heightened senses picked up something no human could detect. A pulse. A heartbeat. And it belonged to the Bauhaus itself. The lamps flickered. The windows rang gently, like glasses struck by wind. And then the Bauhaus lifted from the ground. Just a few centimeters at first. Then a hand's width. Then high enough that dust rolled across the floor like tiny clouds noticing gravity had been dismissed. Outside, people in Weimar gasped. The building was hovering, calmly, confidently, as if Bauhaus had decided the earth was too limiting. Inside, panic lasted only a heartbeat. Because after a moment, everyone understood. The school was responding to creation, to innovation, to the impossible becoming possible. Lucian felt a surge of recognition. He knew this feeling. It was the same sensation he had when he first saw his own faint shadow return. A phenomenon born from transformation, from becoming more real. Klee rushed into the corridor, coat fluttering. "Don't be afraid," he cried, eyes twinkling. "This is what happens when ideas get too big for the ground." Kandinsky was ecstatic. "I always knew architecture could transcend physical law. This is glorious." Write this down. Someone write this down. Gropius, remarkably calm, simply adjusted his spectacles. Well, he murmured, it appears we have achieved levitation through collective creativity. Not a bad result for a Tuesday. The students poured into the central hall, laughing, shouting, clinging to the walls for balance as the building drifted slowly upwards, steady, serene, curious about its new freedom. Patterns of light danced across the walls. Tools and workshops floated gently into the air. Canvas stretched without being touched. For the first time, Lucian understood what true innovation meant. It was not a tool or a technique. It was a force powerful enough to break the laws that held everything in place. He walked to the model of his architecture of shadows, the surreal structure he had designed the night before. The model was glowing faintly. Elise whispered, "Lucian, did you cause this?" He shook his head. "No. We caused this. All of us. Everyone who dared to imagine something beyond what was permitted." The Bauhaus rose another meter into the fog, drifting like a dream unshackled from the world. And then, slowly, elegantly, it settled back onto its foundation, as gently as a sigh. Silence followed. A deep, respectful silence. Then Matthias laughed. "Best lesson we've had all year." Clee clapped his hands. "Excellent. Tomorrow we discuss how to design for buildings that refuse to stay still." Gropius simply smiled, a rare, deeply satisfied smile, and said, "The Bauhaus was never meant to follow rules. It was meant to write them." And Lucian, standing in the hall that had floated above the earth, finally realized something. He had lived for hundreds of years. But only here, in this impossible school, did he begin to feel alive. The night after the Bauhaus floated was unlike any other. There was an electricity in the air, not the sharp kind that precedes a storm, but a soft, glowing charge, like the world itself was holding its breath before something extraordinary. The students felt it. The masters felt it. And Lucian Noct, ancient wanderer of centuries, felt it most of all. He sensed a turning. A hinge in time. A moment when the past, present, and impossible future were all about to collide. As midnight crossed silently into the new day, the fog thickened around the school. The lamps flickered. The windows dimmed. And then, the entire Bauhaus began to shine from within, as if every idea ever imagined inside it were lighting candles on the walls. The students rushed into the courtyard. The glow grew brighter, warmer, stronger. Kandinsky shouted over the rising hum. "This is not normal light. This is conceptual illumination. The architecture is expressing itself." Gropius looked at his school, his dream, and felt tears he did not hide. "I always believed buildings could live," he whispered. "Tonight, it seems, they answer." Lucian stepped forward. His shadow, once barely real, stretched long and confident behind him. The fog swirled. The light intensified. The Bauhaus lifted again, but this time not slowly, not hesitantly. It ascended like a sunrise breaking free of the horizon. Windows widened into radiant eyes. Staircases unfolded like wings. The flat roofs shimmered, rising and shifting into new geometric planes. The building was transforming. Not into a creature. Not into a machine. Into an idea made physical. A living manifesto of everything the Bauhaus stood for. Clarity. Honesty. Unity. Imagination. Courage. And the unbreakable belief that form and function could sing together. The students stood in awe as the Bauhaus expanded upward into the sky, unfolding in clean, pure shapes. Every workshop, every corridor, every surface glowed with the work of the hands that had shaped it. Lucian stepped beneath the rising structure, eyes shining with something greater than wonder. "This," he said softly, "is the architecture of possibility." The building reached its peak height, a floating cathedral of modernity and dream. Then the light focused into a single, immense beam that broke through the clouds, turning night into a gentle, impossible dawn. And in that light, something else rose. Not physical. Not material. An idea, visible like a shimmer in the air. Art and life are not separate. Design is for everyone. Innovation belongs to all who dare to imagine. It spread outward, across Weimar, across Germany, across continents and decades, a wave of inspiration that would outlive every person standing there, shaping the future long after the building itself would one day fall. As the brightness softened, the Bauhaus slowly descended, folding back into its familiar form, humble, functional, human. A building again. But forever changed. The students exhaled. Klee wiped a tear and pretended it was dust. Kandinsky clutched his chest, overwhelmed by the pure abstraction of the moment. And Lucian. Lucian kneeled. For the first time in his immortal life, he felt the weight and wonder of belonging, not to darkness, not to legend, but to creation. "Thank you," he whispered to the school, to the world, to the dawn. Gropius stepped beside him. "You came here to watch," he said. "But you learned to build. That is your rebirth, Lucian Noct." The vampire smiled, fangs glinting like two tiny parentheses around a secret. "I think," he said gently, "that I have finally found a home worth living forever to protect." The sun rose, a true sun this time, spilling gold across the courtyard. And the Bauhaus, calm after its apotheosis, stood quietly in the morning light. But if one looked closely, very closely, at the edges of its windows, one could still see a faint shimmering glow. As if the building remembered the night it touched the sky, and refused to forget. And thus ended the tale of the Bauhaus and its immortal student. a story of creation, transformation, and the eternal dance between light and shadow.